There's, I saw this video, Candace Owens speaking to the students, and it was a young black man who was in college, and they were having a disagreement about this and that, and it kept kind of devolving into citations about the Ku Klux Klan and this, that, the other, and so this is why I brought up in an earlier video, like, this idea of the American right wing, and how I'm like, no, this thing that is the American right wing is a very different concept. That, like, every right wing in every country is different. This is almost definitively why it's not the left. The left wing is based around Marxist philosophy, and it's international. I mean, that's where the song for the left is The International. The revolution, the idea is that it's the endless revolution worldwide. It's literally a planet-wide concept. That's why it's so modern. That's when people talk about the modern period. One of the key things about it is the various schools of socialism, but eventually what you end up with Marx and his followers and people who follow kind of that line of thinking, dialectical materialism, dialectical or dialectic materialism. Oh my gosh. And so you end up with all these young people that don't really realize, like, so why is, like, say, you have to add socialism to other things. So what they don't really get is, so because in some way that's so artificial, this idea of the giant planet-wide collective, you first have to start by collectivizing some group, and typically you're going to collectivize who you can. So this is why you end up with this period of time of, like, racial mysticism a la Noble Drew Ali with black people. A lot of black Americans not knowing this then can't really see the context of why something like the Klan, how any kind of, why the second formation of it in the early modern period, in the early 1900s really, when it starts to come to its height. You can't get this unless you get this idea that there was this fashion for collectivizing people in this way that was along, like, kind of the ancient races of the world. And then there's the kind of kooky ideas that went with that, such as, like, people being descended from an underground city in the North Pole. And, you know, underground cities. Now, there's people, of course, we all are very familiar with that have done videos on this lore and legend, and there's a lot about history we still don't truly understand. But that was a fascination of that period of time, and that included black intellectuals of the day among black Americans. And so that's where you end up getting the Nation of Islam and other things like that. Like, so the Nation of Islam, they could not have had what would have been considered a standard version of the Quran in English. Like that any group of Muslims said, this is an official version. That didn't exist until, like, the 50s. I kid you not, with the exposure that people had until that time, the colonial world, everything, there was not an official translation until, I think, the 50s, and that's the one that comes out of Britain. That's the is it Hunt? No. Oh, it's the Egyptian. It's an Egyptian guy, I believe. Yeah, but it's like 1954 or something like that. It's hella recent. So nobody gets what is right wing in America. You have to know what the left truly is talking about all the time in history. What they're referring to is the idea of locals being local. Now, this is locals being local when it's like, a Bronx Tale or something like that, when it's something kind of cool, like, oh yeah, Jewish Sopranos or something. Then it's different. But once you especially go through quite a bit of, and this is something, you sort of have to know what kind of movies people like my dad were into, and what kind of stories that they thought were these sort of these life-changing stories of great film in America, and this, that, and the other. And so you have to know that, like, there's kind of this fascination with the idea that, oh, the local goon squad and the local good old boys and the, and as if nothing like that existed among Black Americans. Now one could say, well, why don't we see a movie about it? Ding, ding, ding. What, you think Robert Guillaume, you think all these people, they couldn't have written a good story about the old days among Black Americans? Yeah, they could have. It's Mayor Goodwin Mayer and Mayer and and Katzenberg, Ratzenberg, and Zatzenberg. Just they like guys like Hawk better, who eventually becomes Commander Sisko. But first he had to be Hawk. They wanted to give him, they said, we're going to make you tough. Shave your head bald. Put on these sunglasses. And the idea is that you're a bounty hunter. A.K. possibly a private detective, but all black. In a black trench coat in Washington, D.C., the blackest city. Blacktown. And so a lot of people just don't get, like, this deep look back into the history of Black Americana in a way that makes Black people like, yeah, we had like pretty amazing sort of lives and accomplishments, and our lives weren't crazy and chaotic. You see, this would make being right-wing and black normal, but people think that that's weird. They think being black and right-wing is odd. They don't really get. In the 90s, somebody like me, who I said that I was like an atheist, not just agnostic, Black women weren't into that. Black people weren't into that. They were like, what do you mean? You don't believe in nothing? I mean, so one of the big ones is that you can't really, like, the 5% nation. The 5% nation has a variety of ways it understands spirituality, but it's still spirituality. And that in that view, the ideology that is the ideology of hip-hop itself, that was the foundational ideology that established, that establishes it. That this idea that Black people are inherently spiritual, that this is actually something inherent to them, and that it's actually that there's other groups of people that tend to lose their sort of soul, and that's the, of course, racial mysticism part of it that was always implied in the music, and in statements people would make and stuff. But the thing is, though, they wouldn't doubt, like, well, no, but I mean, look at Search and Pete Nice. Those white boys had plenty of soul. But now if you know the reference to Third Base in that song, white boy, you got so much soul. And so anyway, yeah, actually I gotta go and get my groceries. But this is a good walk. Wow, it's really nice, David. It's gonna get real hot out here pretty soon. So then you get this idea. So there's a number of categories that no one refers to sort of correctly. The conservatives are conserving some kind of culture, a bubble of culture that they don't want that interrupted by, and mostly this is going to be Marxists, who will say that your antiquated, backward, old-fashioned culture, and they'll demonize it like crazy. Now, you see, black people have not run into this from the left that much yet. Once the left cinches it in and digs their teeth into black American men is what it will be. And that's where you see it. You see these attempts all the time at little nipping at the ankles of black American men and black American women, because they're so unexpectedly hostile and reactionary and caustic, will snap back and be like, oh, no, you don't. You can't talk about our men like that. Blah, 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 ally. Be a good ally. Blah, 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 blah. Give me money. Is my cash app. Anyway, give my organization money, and that's what you need to do. You need to give somebody somewhere money, and like, that's what's up, something like that. Which of course only makes, the left kind of have to sit there and sort of scratch their neck like, oh my God, like what do they not hear what they say? And it's then, and then there's people like me on the right that's like, no, they don't get it. They don't get it at all. They don't understand. They don't understand what you're getting at. They don't understand their own interests. They don't understand philosophy at a level that they should be trying to apply it politically. And so what they don't get, that what they have is their interests. Black people have their community interests. And what they like usually is entirely, en totem, what is good for them. And then they just make these sort of very lame claims that's good for everybody overall. It's like, yeah. And with often the more and more the open, this kind of open, like veiled threat of riot, over and over again. So it's, but you never know what might happen if you don't give us hella money, and it's just, and now this is just embarrassing. This is actually getting to the point where it's like a lot of black men are just humiliated by this kind of racket that that now it's just so open, that there's always some black woman in a dumbass t-shirt with some dumbass political statement on it threatening a town council, some city council or some group. You never know what might happen if you don't start some programs or something like this, and whatever. So, see, if you had an intact culture, notice the Chinese aren't asking for programs. The Southeast Asians who move here are typically dirt poor. A lot of the Chinese who come here, they usually are poor people. It's that they have high cultural capital, which means culturally they just have practices and norms that are all the way down to the words they use that make them do things that end up making them extremely valuable to society as a group, that society ends up noticing that it's the Chinese. Yeah, no, the Chinese own all that kind of thing. The Chinese run that. No, the Chinese are the people who like kind of dominate that industry, yada, yada, yada. And I mean, really, black Americans need to start thinking, what industries do you actually dominate? Are you doing something that then gets the next generation to think of doing that as normal, such as seafaring? Seafaring takes an extremely long time to make normal. There's this sort of mythology people have about mighty fleets of Africa going throughout the world, and now everyone's covering it up. You could tell in all these pictures and statues and poorly analyzed artifacts, but really what it is that seafaring, you have huge infrastructure for it. There's usually written language once you're above a certain level of trade, that you have written records for things, and because you have an entire cultural thing that develops, like say with the British and a thing called insurance that came from their seafaring trade. And that's something they inherited, from waves and waves and waves of people also then assaulting them by boat. So that's the other thing, is you typically will not build amazing boats. You will build like manageable boats until you happen upon other people's boats. And when you happen upon other people's boats, you're like, oh, that's a really great idea for how you dealt with this problem. We never thought of building it like that. That's just the way that goes. I mean, that's why we have small cars from American companies. They started building small cars to emulate the Japanese cars. This is a great idea to have a really small car if that's what you needed. A lot of Black Americans aren't really getting that they are right-wing in what they desire. Interest for their group. It's that there's right now this cultural thing of Christianity is this antiquated slave religion that makes you give in. Because that's what for some reason, this bizarre thing, you're constantly having to close the box and open the box over and over and over again, never look inside. So open the box and it's like, oh, that Christianity, the slave religion, blah, 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 or Black people kept their families together around the community churches, and literacy spread because of then Psalms, and this is this common book that you could get everywhere, and that was normal to Christian civilization. And a lot of the people who had freed the slaves, the abolitionists in that culture, were encouraging such behavior, and that's also how they ensured female literacy within their own ranks. And so it's, for some reason, all these people being taught by these New England white wives how to read, one of the most important books in the world, and understand this set of ideas, that it's like, to explain these ideas you have to go back into Roman and Greek and then sometimes Egyptian history. So it then ties you to the history of the Mediterranean world, through the most important thing, the advancement of ideas, that you don't have to be of the bloodline of these people to get all of the benefits of their greatest ideas. Because in the Mediterranean world, Christianity had to spread actually by conversion. They couldn't just take people over. It didn't work. The armies weren't available until later. And so where, then there's this embrace of Islam, a religion that now we're finding out, like the way that they've told their story to the Western world within the last about 40 years has been this like fascinating realm of make-believe and myth, like no other could believe, and because of how loony, rapacious, and phony the foundation of the religion is, but it's strong. It's strong because white people fear it. That's what it is. That's the whole issue with this transgressive aspect of Black American culture that now has come into its logical form as the anti-white man. And this is the leftist dream. This is, the creature that could be unleashed upon the world so that it could bring the final shattering of things, and all these shattered pieces could be brought together in a great ultra mitzvot, for tikkun olam. Good work, suckers. Instead of being something like 5%ers, that you actually have an internal culture that is brought mouth to ear. Like literally, like the 5%ers literally teach each other the 5% nation culture. But so stuff like, I just started thinking about this, like rolling this around, because this is something that once people understand, like, really, how weird would it be among you and, say, your family if somebody in your family was like, oh, I'm an atheist? Like, not like that you would you'd say something terrible, you know, but I mean, that would just be odd. You know, like, you'd think like, wow, well, I mean, I guess, you know, but I mean, you know, like, that would be weird to your family. That they would have a member of their family that would suddenly just give up all faith. You know, isn't that weird? You're unique in that.